All right, everybody, welcome to the Business Spotlight. Today, I'm joined by Celia Bugno of Highbrow Honey. She's a big supporter of the arts. She's also the founder, owner, creator, host, and a myriad of other titles at the Highbrow Honey podcast. Celia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump right in. Just tell us a little bit about Highbrow Honey and how you got started and how you got into this business. And yeah, we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. So I began Highbrow Honey in September of 2023, so just over 2 years ago. And I started playing with the idea of an arts-based yet entertainment-minded podcast while I was finishing my master's at Arizona State in May of that year. I was spending a lot of time at this local place called Bookman's, it billed itself as an entertainment store, and it just had hundreds and hundreds of books, records, CDs, PlayStations, all kinds of things. And I noticed they had this enormous art book section. And I spent a lot of money at Bookman's, but I also came away with the idea that, there's really something here. There's a lot of things that are being published about the arts and potentially fruitful stories. I had been listening to podcasts quite a bit in the few years leading up to that. And so the idea of translating my passion and my educational career into a storytelling format came to me. I figured the timeline matched up really great because I knew I was, shortly after graduation, going to go on the Camino de Santiago hike over in Spain. So I'd be gone for a few months. I didn't think it made sense to look for a job, only to immediately ask for a significant amount of time off. So I planned to come back in the fall, get my job search started, continue playing around with the podcast idea. Yet some of the experiences that I had on the Camino, especially the more people that I told about this idea for a podcast, the more encouragement I got, the more confidence I had in myself. So I came back and September 2023 launched the whole thing. I have also been a lifelong storyteller. I love the act of getting people excited, making them gasp, making them, fearful, cringe, whatever, through telling them about something. And had been a speech kid in high school. So I already had some of these quote unquote radio skills built up. And it just made a lot of sense to me to do this whole thing. I've realized in the last several years that really my career goal is to contribute to public knowledge, even although it's a bit lofty, public unity through the efforts of my work. I really want to inspire the same love of learning that my mentors and professors have inspired in me. And so the aim of Highbrow Honey is to, in our full-length episodes at least, which drop about once a month now, reveal these historical parallels between past and present via thematic explorations, and really encourage not only individual but also collective reflection, even research, if someone wants to learn more about an artist or a movement that I've brought up on these arts and culture ideas, because they have through lines for our present. You can learn quite a bit about what has mattered to people as a whole throughout the entirety of time, just by looking at what we all choose to represent time and time again.
Nice. So big fan, big supporter of the arts, and just looking to have real highbrow conversations with other folks that are interested as well. Right? Am I hearing that right?
Yes and no, because the content tends to be highbrow. It tends to be stuff that I have covered in my upper education classes here. I know what it's like to be a beginner as well. I never expected to go into this field, actually. The day I called my mom and said, hey, I want to be an art history major, I don't think she's ever been so shocked in her life. I had no, creative inclination as a kid, but I did always like museums and reading the wall text. And so the idea of working in education, not a terrible surprise, but what I found with my art historical classes, the first two that I was required to take at my liberal arts college, was that it wasn't necessarily about whether the artist had used oil or tempera watercolor or whether the statue was made of granite versus bronze. What mattered to me was the stories, was going through the artworks and hearing about the connections that they made to their time, how they reflected some concern or another, and how humanizing that was, how these artworks really acted as a record of human reaction throughout history. But that's a big statement, right? And I want to more or less translate that through using plain English in my episodes to a more accessible format. I think the arts get a lot of flack and are avoided by definitely, at least historically, excluded groups of people because of this elitism that we sort of train in art history, whether it be through schooling or through the very like hush hush, strict behavior museum experience. And I think that's unfair. I want to remove the barriers to entry as much as I possibly can. And I see the podcast and the way of making these stories into a fun experience as a means of doing that.
Nice. So how do you go about finding guests for the podcast?
We actually don't feature a ton of guests. We have the once monthly specials or full length specials. We have every Tuesday, I drop a news summary of the calendar week before that features the headlines I think are most important, as well as an explanation of why I think they're most important. But we have had a few guests on in the 2 years and something months. Most of them are people that I am closely connected with. For example, we've had one of my former mentors, I should say, Lauren O'Connell, who works as a curator for the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, on the podcast. And we talked about quite a few things, admittedly, some things that were related to experiences the two of us had had, mostly through the How I Met Her, which was a class on curating in the contemporary hosted by Arizona State. I had another guest on that was a cohort member of mine, Jacob Robertson, who talked quite a bit about his thesis in relation to the pre-Raphaelite movement, and more specifically, Evelyn de Morgan, a member of it, how even though she was a model for some of the male and female artists of that movement, she very much made her own original and creative contributions. I don't remember if they were explicitly through artworks that she created or what the medium was, but she had a significant hand in it, more than I ever realized. And so we talked quite a bit about his experience going to London to perform research for his thesis. All of my artists were American. I had to stay here. But he got to go to London. He got to go to, I'm fairly certain it was Pennsylvania, if not Connecticut, quite a few places, and do his research. And it was interesting to hear him talk about how certain resources were better preserved than others, especially by the De Morgan estate versus the larger system of archives throughout England. And the third guest that we had on was an art consultant who I had the pleasure of meeting just because she reached out to me. She found me somehow. Her name is Dr. Kohana Hendry, and we talked quite a bit about what it is like from her perspective, balancing respect for the artist with the commission and what the goals of the commissioner are, navigating landmines and pitfalls in that area. And thankfully, she's not had to deal with too many or too severe of ones, but just the nuances of why it's important to have art even in corporate spaces and things of that nature.
Gotcha. So maybe what I should have asked instead of the guest is topics. How do you know, on that monthly segment, how do you go about selecting your topics?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a wide range of inspirations. One of the things I do for my own happiness as well as to maintain my professional presence in the arts is go to a ton of museums, events,
Mhm.
openings of exhibitions, so on. And so that's been quite frequently a source of inspiration. For example, we had a sequel prequel on glass arts earlier this year.
Okay.
And it was inspired by two separate exhibitions, actually. The first one at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, where I went with my brother while I was moving to Madison from Arizona in January. And then another one at the Chazen Museum of Art here in Madison that happened probably 4 months later and was much more about the mid-century, the modern glass movement. And I was looking at my photos and the timing of these two things, and I thought, well, there's something right there. And was able to develop two connected yet separate, standalone kind of episodes addressing
Mhm.
how glass evolved at these 2 points in time that also connected to broader themes, I guess you could say, kind of ongoing cycles of economic development or human progress on the whole. Some other inspirations have been, like the episode I did on Johanna Bonger, who was the sister-in-law of Vincent van
And
Gogh,
go.
married
Yeah.
to his older brother Theo. She took it upon herself to make Vincent's legacy well known after both of the two men's deaths. Otherwise, we never would have known who Vincent van Gogh was. He would have been lost to history entirely. And I didn't even know about Johanna Bonger until my mom, for her book club, downloaded a book that included in the narrative that story. And so then I was really compelled to do my own research and see, what would that life really have been like for Joanna, widowed at 28 with a young son, and all of this weight upon her to embody her husband's dream, to see it become a reality.
Mhm.
There have been even and I apologize to my professors for this, but there have been episodes that I have pretty much pulled straight from my notes in this class or the other. For example, we did one called Concrete Memories, and it
Mhm.
was all about memorials made out of concrete. But they all had their own connotations, their own context, their own shapes and forms. So it was an episode exploring how we capture various memories and what it means to capture them in something like concrete versus something like wood.
Mhm.
Concrete, I think hard, industrial, enduring. Wood, I think warm, natural, cozy home. So looking at some of these instances, even differences in the meanings, although they both directly deal with death, between Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial in DC and the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. And the name of that artist is escaping me right this second. Both are made of concrete, yet they're such dramatically different shapes and speak to such different cultural historical traumas, even though both are very strongly related to death. There's conversations to be had about how even similar materials can create different effects when they are referencing different histories.
Mhm. That's interesting. And it was really interesting going back to what you were saying about just kind of is it Van Gogh's sister-in-law, right?
And yeah, Joanna
If,
Bonner.
if
I don't know why
yeah,
I
if
keep
she,
wanting to add a Van to her name.
but if she hadn't told everybody, we would know nothing about, Van Gogh is what you were saying.
Very
How
likely.
often do you how often do you think that happens? Is that really prevalent? Like we only know about these artists because of I guess somebody else recants or documents it, or is there just a lot of artists that it is
Mm.
just lost to history? We know nothing about the artist. Is that very common?
Ooh, that is such a great question. And I think the best answer is also sort of a non-answer.
Naturally.
Well, right. There are absolutely artists who have been lost to history.
Hmm.
The reasons for them being lost, however, could be so very many. It is possible that they just never had a patron who, took care to document their work. It could
Hmm.
be somewhat intentional erasure from the art historical canon for one reason or another.
Yeah.
It could be just lack of popularity. There are artists, from any number of time periods who wouldn't necessarily fit the aesthetic trends of today. And so they
Hmm.
are not as frequently talked about, even within the art historical circles. That means that the quote unquote lay person is less likely to hear about them, know about them.
Yeah.
There are also definitely cases where that exclusion has been more malicious. I'm thinking of how, and this is we could make a whole podcast episode out of just this essay, so I'll make
Yeah.
this as short as possible. But in the 1970s, early 1970s, I believe, there was an art historian by the name of Linda Nochlin. And as soon as I say that name, every art historian knows where I'm going with this. But she wrote an essay called "Why Are There No Great Women Artists?" And the answer that she provided was because women were prevented from achieving greatness as it is defined when we say great artists.
Hmm.
Women were not, until must have been, I believe, the middle of the 19th century, allowed into the academies, national academies, which
Hmm.
was almost exclusively the way that any artist learned how to paint, sculpt, etc. Women were ostracized or treated poorly in society if they, certain parts of society, if they were to, and I'm speaking mostly about European women here in art history,
Hmm.
if they were to pursue jobs outside the home, if they were to pursue a male activity like art, which required intelligence and forethought and physicality, even sometimes, depending on the
Yeah.
scale of the artwork. So, so now Glenn comes along and asks, why are there no great women artists? Because women were not allowed to be great. And that shifted every paradigm for art
Hmm.
history. It began an entire, which was somewhat concurrent with second wave feminism. It got us all looking back for these great women artists as we could define them sort of within what great would be for a woman artist. Like what were the echelons, what was possible for a woman at the time? If she surpassed it, met it, that made her great. And so that's how we know, or we got to talking more about artists like Artemisia Gentileschi or Judith Leyster or some of the others. And yet there were some problematic aspects of that too, which is, again, a whole nother podcast episode. But the more that simple question, that simple answer of who was allowed to be great, what greatness meant, and who was defining that. Those are all aspects that continue to affect the art historical canon or the official library, the official record of important art, I guess you could say is what the canon is. And continue to affect our discussions today about artists who show up at places like the Venice Biennale, the biggest art event of the year, arguably,
Hmm.
or other fairs, show up in exhibitions. The conversation continues to evolve in terms of who can and should define greatness and by what measures.
Yeah, I think that that happens in a lot of other areas. I know in the scientific community, there, especially in that time period, a couple
Hmm.
hundred years ago, there was a lot of. It was more a little bit of a popularity contest as
Yeah,
to who was remembered as the great scientist, and they would kind of thwart each other's efforts, and
absolutely.
so that I know that that happens even in advertising. You
Hmm.
know, a lot of the award winners are the people that have, or the the organizations that have been around and know the right people, and
Yeah.
some of the best work in the world is probably unrecognized in every category, and
Hmm.
vice versa. Some things are probably recognized that shouldn't be. So
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's always interesting to see that play out in multiple different areas. But kind of
Mhm.
pulling it back into the discussion about the podcast,
Yes.
we've talked a lot about history, and then obviously, or I would assume, you're
Hmm.
tying that in with current events. So tell me a little bit about that. How are you able to kind of connect those two?
Yeah, I do it whenever possible. There are arguably, depending on, of course, what time period I'm talking about, less opportunities to make some of those connections in the full length episodes, although I do try
Mhm.
when possible. I'm trying to think of a specific and recent example. Oh, I did within the last year an episode on the intersections of AI and art.
Okay.
And so that episode, I started off a little historical with, where did technologies first start interacting with art, and then brought it up to today's concerns of data mining and other such things. And through, I guess it's a sort of indirect connection through tracing some of these arcs throughout history,
Mhm.
and finding the universal truths of them, or the universal core, the human behavior in them. I try to connect it back to the present day. Um, one connection that I'm making just offhand that I could potentially talk about in a future episode is, there was one I covered, Diego Rivera's mural in the Rockefeller Center that was done in the 1930s, I'm fairly certain, was removed within a year. And that was not only because the Rockefellers claimed that it had communist symbolism in it, communist imagery, it is also because it shamed the Rockefellers a little bit. It painted
Right.
them
Of
as the
course.
bad
Yeah.
guys to some degree. Right. But of course, they didn't like that so much, so they took it
Mhm.
down. And I can't begin to tell you how many instances of censored art I have, or alleged censored art, art being removed or altered in public view this year alone. It's been
Like
at
now,
least once a
current,
week in my,
currently.
yes, at least once a
Wow.
week in my news special. There's some exhibition that got shut down, another artist who had a curtain put in front of their work, a third who lost funding because their exhibition was DEI related.
Mhm.
Just a lot of not great omens when it comes to freedom of speech. And so
Okay. So
I,
this is currently going on, and this is
yes.
more a freedom of expression kind of situation where what we're saying is that certain pieces of art are being, for lack of a
Hmm.
better term, censored.
Yes.
And then what is the driving force for that?
I think it depends on exactly the case. There absolutely have been instances where the show, the artist, whatever, has been accused of violating DEI mandates that were put into place by the current administration over the course of this year. There have been instances where it was uh, pro-Palestine imagery was included in the artwork. And so the hosting organization or venue would get, I suspect, nervous about that, given
Mhm.
what a hot topic it is in the US today. And what was the one? There was a community center, native um, affiliated community center. I think it was in Evanston, Illinois, that
Mhm.
about a month ago, they had commissioned an artist to do a mural. He's doing the mural. It's about to be in the final stages, but the sketch underneath it had included some pro-Palestine imagery, just sort of to help the artist figure out where he'd want it, like watermelons and certain things, just to help the artist figure out what he wanted the final layout to be.
Mhm.
The center canceled his commission, painted over the sketch, and to my knowledge, still have not apologized or really explained that behavior beyond simply, we can't take a stance, we don't want to take a stance on Palestine versus Israel. And to me, that's really unfortunate, especially because this was not a final design. This was a preparatory sketch that was covered up and resulted in the loss of that job and also that public art. I understand, especially working at the Wisconsin Historical Society as I do currently, and I must, of course, then give the disclaimer, this is all my private opinion, speaking as a citizen, not a governmental employee here.
Right.
But I do think there is concern in the sheer number of cases where that sort of thing has happened.
Yeah. And that it's an interesting climate right now, because there are topics that I think people just don't want to touch.
Yes.
They're emotionally charged and they're politically charged, and it's tough to balance. And I assume you have to deal with the same. It's tough to balance. Am I on a side, or am I neutral? Or sometimes you don't have the choice. There is no neutral. You have to pick a side a little bit. And so it's tough to navigate that. So, I mean, I'm assuming
Yeah,
that comes up in your podcast a little bit. That's going to be
absolutely
tough.
it does. Absolutely
Yeah.
it does. When I started this thing, I promised myself I was going to be as neutral as I could possibly manage.
Mm-hmm.
And I still wouldn't say that I'm often overtly political in my reporting, and especially the commentary on it. I never fudge the headlines. I'll put it that
Mm-hmm.
way. What I say, unless it is clearly an aside, is direct from a reliable source like Art News or New York Times, CNN, Smithsonian Records, museums from across the globe. I use reliable sources and I quote them as accurately as I can, paraphrase them as accurately as I can. That being said, especially with the year the arts have had this year in terms of the funding cuts and the mandates against specific kinds of arts or specific kinds of representation, and the firings and resignations from some of the leaders and the most boots on the ground people that we in the arts have in the upper echelons of the federal government, that has been very scary to me. And I have had a very hard time, especially as this all continues to go on, maintaining a somewhat neutral stance. You know, I'm not trying to ostracize anybody by making a snide comment about Trump or whatever. But at the same time, it is my personal belief and also fact, documented fact, that the arts are incredibly important for our lives and our livelihood. There are all kinds of proven economic and educational. I knew I was going to use it, so I pulled up the statistics right here. The National Endowment for the Arts reports that the arts and cultural industries grew at twice the rate of the U.S. economy in 2025, adding or maybe that was 2024. Let me double check this, because I'm not going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah. No worries.
2023, $1.2 trillion. Trillion with a T. That's 4.2% of our GDP as a nation.
Wow.
So to attack the arts, which are a resource and a form of expression and a way for us all to connect and grow, is a huge red flag to me, and something that I feel I should adamantly stand against, because once we lose the freedoms of expressions, we lose everything in terms of freedom. In my opinion, it is the most crucial thing we have: our voices and our ability to stand up as a collective for something, or even stand up individually. And I see the value of the arts, and it is within my morals to have everyone have an opportunity to learn and to experience and to access. And what I'm seeing in these headlines and what I am reporting in my news segment is those things coming under threat time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very difficult to understand how strong the opposition is against the arts right now,
Mm-hmm.
and all the plans and dismantling that they have in place and are carrying out, and to not feel the need to do everything in my power to protect what I am passionate about, and especially historical fact, because that is how we learn, is by talking about and reviewing what came before us, by connecting to other people. There's a lot of divisiveness right now in just the presentation of information. And I don't want to be a part of that divisiveness. But
Mm-hmm.
I also, I don't want to be a cause to make people fight. But I also really have to stand by what I know is important. And what I know is important is what we gain from the arts as a nation and as individuals.
I think that's your responsibility, just being who you are and doing what you do, is to advocate for your own area, right?
Exactly.
You're an art history
Hmm.
support member. You're a member of that community, so it's your
Yeah.
responsibility to advocate, I think,
Yeah.
for the importance of the arts.
In
Um,
both of my jobs, this
yeah.
is what I do: is provide arts to the people, or history to the people. In the case of the Historical Society
Mhm.
program, assistant program manager position. But yeah, it is my job, and I take my job very seriously.
As you should.
Mhm.
And with that said, kind of, where do you see kind of the vision for the podcast, or what do you hope the podcast is able to accomplish over the next couple of years?
I would love to continue growing, um, in your traditional metrics of audience and monetization and whatever. But I would also like
Mhm.
to keep growing creatively. Some of the things that I have learned how to do through the course of this podcast, whether that be in the interest of traditional growth, like making reels for social media, or whether that be launching a Substack, my first ever attempt at publishing my writing, to provide another format for educational content, resources, entertainment,
Mhm.
little blog posts, and whatever the case may be. I'd like to keep growing creatively in that sense too, and continue exploring what is possible for an art historian who also, I like to think of myself as a pretty broad-ranging person. I also play rugby after all.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So I'd like to,
That's a brutal sport, isn't it?
eh, if you
You
don't,
must be one tough gal.
I like to think so.
Yeah.
Rugby is a tough sport. It is more than anything a game of the mind, and a
Mhm.
team game. You do have to be able to take and give a tackle and not get pissed off at the person who did it,
Yeah, I couldn't
because
do it.
it is not personal. It is part of the game.
Yeah.
And so to have that level of physicality and also that level of self-control
Mhm.
has been a really great thing for me over the years, and definitely also a boost in the confidence that helped me start this whole thing.
Yeah, for
So
sure. All right. Well, Celia, I appreciate the time. We've been doing this for a little bit now, about 35 minutes. So I
yeah,
appreciate that's a lot to cover, a lot of ground to
absolutely.
cover. And you're right. We had about 4 moments there where I think we could have had a whole episode just based on that topic, especially on the history stuff. So
Right.
that was good. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about Highbrow Honey, or where maybe our audience can find more information about the podcast?
Yeah, more information, absolutely. And also, I guess one more final plug. Our
Hmm.
third episode type that we have ongoing, it's called the 5 Minute Musical, and it's an end of the month
Okay.
special. I recap a music video in as close to 5 minutes as I possibly can, and I explain its cultural significance or its fine arts connections. For example, started with Beyonce's Hold Up from Lemonade and explained how that music video was very closely related when the art world first saw it to Pipolati Wrist's 1980 something installation. um, I've also covered Lil Nas X's Montero, talked about all the queer drag ballroom symbology in there, as well as the Christian backlash on it, and have had even more episodes since, with the latest for October being Michael Jackson's Thriller. So that one's available on Patreon. I
Okay.
mentioned the Substack earlier. You can find both just under the Highbrow Honey name. And we are also
Mhm.
available anywhere you stream. We are present on Instagram. We like to think we make funny content for you, so check it out. And other than that, I just would like to wish everyone a safe and happy November. Good holidays. Remember to take care of yourselves. Remember to hydrate or dihydrate, as I always say in my closing.
I just got done with a 3-day hike, so I'll back you up on that. Hydrate or
Definitely.
dihydrate.
Yeah, you're gonna need it.
Yeah.
Some Gatorades after this, maybe.
Oh yeah. I'm still catching up.
All right.
But
Great.
Celia, it was really great to have you on the show, and we appreciate all the insight and all the information. And for those of you that are listening, please go check out Highbrow Honey.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye bye.